Hello, and welcome back to the channel. Today, in this episode of Marathon Musings, I decided I'm going to talk a little bit deeper about something I've been rambling about in streams for the past few months. And I'm going to be referring to this topic as the Traxus Connection. Obviously, I am somebody who was infatuated with the ARG and the breadth of information that we received from the vast amount of documents, images, videos, and everything else. But in particular, the thing that I found most narratively interesting, and I feel like did so much to combine the universe of the original games and the new games, is the timeline that we got for Traxus. The history page of Traxus' website gives us a timeline of events that briefly outline how Traxus went from a meddling tech company to the megacorp giant that's at play in the upcoming game. To quickly review, the first entry is 2095, which is when the company was founded, and they state that their goal was to, quote, create an entity that could pierce the veil of the cosmos and unlock the enigmatic secrets that lay hidden in the celestial abyss. This section also shows that Traxus' history is inherently tied to the birth of artificial intelligence, and that the company itself was going to engage with these types of technologies. It's important to note here that even at this foundational stage, the mission statement that I read earlier sounds exactly like something that could come out of Durandal's mouth when he's experiencing rampancy. This feels to me like some pretty obvious foreshadowing that could hint at the nefarious things they're going to be doing hundreds of years later. The next section is referred to as the Harvest, and it explains how Traxus expanded into extraterrestrial mining before relocating their corporation to Mars in 2145. Most importantly, this positions Traxus on Mars just 50 or so years prior to the 2206 shutdown of the Martian net because of the rampancy of the AI Traxus 4. The naming convention given to that AI from the original trilogy obviously hints in this context that it was the fourth generation of an AI developed by Traxus the company. The next period is referred to as the Forge and is given the year 2300. The entire paragraph basically just talks about how Traxus overcame adversity to continue on their megacorporation goal of expanding into the universe, obviously hinting at the 2206 crash being something that set the company back financially and professionally. This is followed by a period they called the Ascension, which takes place in the 25th century, which also happens to be the same century in which the Marathon was built at Mars. Here, Traxus describes themselves as, quote, stretching across the solar system like tendrils of stardust, clearly indicating that this was a period of great advancement for the company, where they began to achieve some of the goals from their mission statement back in 2095. This is the section that I credit with creating the, quote, Traxus Connection that I talked about earlier, and once we get through this history, we're going to come back and look at this a little bit deeper, but for now, let's move on. This history section concludes with the, quote, Transcendence or Modern Era period, which is given the date 2888, assumedly around the time that we're going to be playing in this upcoming game. This section primarily serves to set up Traxus in the position that will most likely see them within the extraction shooter, that they are a megacorporation operating within the Tau Ceti solar system that clearly stand in some level of opposition to the other players we have involved in the situation out there. The section concludes with stating that Traxus is charting the course of our collective destiny amongst the stars, obviously harkening back to all of the various mission statements and goals that we've talked about prior. So now that we've reviewed the history as given by Traxus, let's take a step back and look at the 25th century within the Marathon universe, the 2400s. The first key event that kind of kicks off the overall theme of this century happens 5 years prior in 2395, when the UESG purchased Deimos from Freeholders, a moon of Mars, to turn it into the ship, the Marathon. The conversion of the moon Deimos into the ship, the Marathon, would begin about 10 years later in 2408, and the next piece of history we get happens in 2442 when we have the Mizraya massacre. This was a food riot that turned deadly and ultimately resulted in over 500 dead Martians, when in reality only 3 of them were armed. This happened due to the failure of the Christ Soul Orbiters, which were the ships that were used to transport resources from Earth to sustain the colony of people that humanity had on Mars. Over the course of a few hundred years, these ships basically became untenable due to the resources it would take to restore them and send them back to Mars, and thus the Martians suffered because they lost the resources required to sustain their existence. The hardship experienced due to this extreme level of poverty ultimately led to the creation of a political rebellion group called MITA. Now, we don't know exactly what this acronym means, and the writers in the ARG even play with this concept, offering a bunch of possible meanings for the acronym that indicate the set of values and beliefs that MITA holds. Largely, these beliefs appear to be that the citizens of Mars deserve just as much respect, health, and welfare as those of Earth and anywhere else within Sol. The combination of the poverty on Mars, the Mizrahi massacre, and now the introduction of MITA ultimately leads to the Third Martian War, which occurs from 2442 to 2445. And although it seems like the UESC or larger government on Mars was able to stomp out this rebellion, in 2465, 20 years later, Martians are able to place munitions on board the Marathon. And the following year, in 2466, Martians attempt a coup in which MITA controls the government for 3 months. It's also important to note here that while MITA is in charge for those 3 months, a large amount of death and devastation comes to the Martian people, under circumstances that aren't elaborated on in the original trilogy or in the contents of the ARG. This coup is followed only 4 short years later with the launch of the Marathon in 2472, which sets into place the events of the original trilogy by putting the colony ship in the Tau Ceti star system. This launch is ultimately the last thing that we learn about the 25th century, kind of an end cap to what appears to be one of the most historically significant periods in the Marathon universe, but still shrouded in a ton of mystery. So how does the history of Traxus impact our knowledge of this century? Well, let's take a look back at the period covering the 2400s from Traxus' history page. The entire paragraph from that section reads, Traxus Off-World Industries stands as a titan among the stars. The resurrection of the Christ as the Traxus Off-World Solar Orbiters is a testament to the indomitable spirit of human ingenuity. We have become architects of a new reality, our branches and subsidiaries stretching across the solar system like tendrils of stardust. Our technologies have transcended the mundane confines of the Earth, and our influence resonates throughout the infinite cosmos. Let's start by taking a look at this, quote, resurrection of the Christ as the Traxus Off-World Solar Orbiters. As we just talked about when discussing the history of the 2400s from the stuff that we learned in the original trilogy, MITA is a key player in the events that occur both on the Marathon and within Sol when it comes to Mars. But very little is done to expand on their position in the hierarchy of power within Sol. This inclusion of Traxus being the ones who fixed the Christ issue, which was the ailment that afflicted the Martian people, thus causing the creation of MITA, does a lot to paint a clearer picture of how they were enabled to achieve what they did. Through this lens, we can view Traxus as a kind of third party to the conflict that exists between the UESC and MITA. A third party which has a clear interest in ensuring the success of the Marathon project, as that also helps them reach their proposed mission statement of expanding across the stars. So how does a megacorp that probably has profit in mind first and then whatever their selfish goals in mind right below that come to the conclusion that ensuring a welfare program like resource distribution to impoverished people is worthy of their time and effort? Well, what if this was their bargaining chip? The bargaining chip that Traxus played to MITA to ensure that they wouldn't interfere with the Marathon project. We know, based off the wars and ability to murder and cause havoc while they were in charge, that MITA is capable of creating a lot of destruction and chaos for the UESC. And we know that their time and power came to an end only 3 months later. We're also not given an exact date for when these Christ replacements were actually put into effect. But it would make a lot of sense if they were offered to Mida in return for control being given back to the UESC so that they could complete the Marathon project. This would do a lot to explain the extreme relevance of the conflict in Mars for the first half of the 25th century, and then this abrupt conclusion where things are able to continue smoothly even throughout the launch of the Marathon. The conclusion of the paragraph about this Ascension period also hints that Traxus was probably one of the primary contractors that the UESC was utilizing to conduct the operation to build the Marathon. This provides another layer of depth that entangles Traxus to the powers that be in Sol and explains the complex relationship occurring between the three entities being the UESC, Traxus, and Mida. This Cold War style dynamic where all three major powerful groups are tied to each other in ways that require some level of cooperation to achieve their goals, while also having goals that are entirely separate and some even act to denigrate the other, creates a lot of tension that explains the past relationships that we see in historical events within the Marathon universe. I feel like this connective piece of narrative is so important to what we're going to see unfold in the upcoming Marathon game, and the fact that they pulled all of this from this small inclusion about this Traxus AI in the 2200s, and then the Christ Soul Orbiter problems that lead to the war in the 2400s, just displays such a high caliber of writing on behalf of the staff at Bungie. We even get additional confirmation that we're kind of on the right line of thinking here when we look at the Traxus chat logs and see the board of directors talking about Mida being given this seat at the table. This proverbial seat at the table seems inherently tied to Traxus empowering them to do these kind of negotiations via the agreement that must have been made around the introduction of the Christ replacements. This whole little piece of lore is something that I find myself coming back to over and over again, and I just feel like a video was needed to describe just how cool it is. Well, I hope you guys all enjoyed some more Marathon lore rambling, and if you have any other perspectives or something that you think I missed, or any other thoughts about Traxus or Mida or the UESC, please let me know in the comments, and have a good day. All right, love you. Bye.